At a lavish charity gala, a shabby little girl walked in with only one request: to play a piece of music in exchange for food. The wealthy guests burst into laughter, convinced she was just putting on an act to get a free meal. They decided to set up a challenge, hoping to humiliate her for daring to interrupt their party. What happened next left everyone in the ballroom stunned. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. In the opulent heart of Willow Creek, where towering glass structures kissed the clouds and manicured parks whispered tales of old money, the Grand Imperial Ballroom shimmered with a particular luminescence. Tonight it hosted the annual Hearts of Harmony Charity Gala, an event ostensibly dedicated to raising funds for aspiring young artists from disadvantaged backgrounds. Crystal chandeliers, suspended like frozen cascades of light, cast a golden glow upon the polished mahogany floors and tables laden with gourmet delicacies. Guests, adorned in designer evening wear, moved with an air of practiced nonchalance, their conversations a low, elegant hum punctuated by the clinking of champagne flutes. Each person present represented a significant pillar of Willow Creek's social and financial elite, their presence a testament to their influence and to some their self-perceived benevolence. The soft, uncertain voice of a young girl, perhaps 12 years old, carried across the polished floors, slicing through the refined hum of conversation and drawing all eyes. "Is it possible for me to play the piano for something to eat?" Clara Evans stood at the entrance to the main hall, her large, earnest eyes fixed on the gleaming Steinway grand piano positioned beneath the central chandelier. Her simple, slightly oversized clothes, a faded denim jacket, a plain t-shirt and worn jeans, stood in stark contrast to the shimmering silks and sharp tuxedos surrounding her. She clutched a well-used backpack to her chest, as if it were the only shield she possessed against the intimidating grandeur of the room. A woman with meticulously styled silver hair, clutching a delicate champagne glass, leaned in to whisper to her companion, "How did that child even gain entry here?" Her voice, though hushed, carried a note of indignant surprise. "Where is the security team?" The irony of the situation did not escape Clara, who had spent the last week navigating the impersonal corridors of various city shelters, her stomach a constant dull ache of hunger. She had merely passed the imposing hotel entrance earlier that day, drawn by the vibrant lights and the distant elegant melodies, and an inexplicable inner drive had compelled her to attempt entry. Eleanor Vance, the formidable event organizer and heiress to an old family fortune, approached Clara with measured, deliberate steps. At 45, Eleanor was the embodiment of Willow Creek's social pinnacle, impeccably educated, flawlessly refined, and utterly convinced of her own superior moral compass. A tight, superior smirk played on her lips as she addressed the girl. "Darling," she began, her tone dripping with thinly veiled condescension, "this is hardly the appropriate place for someone like you. There's a fast food restaurant 2 blocks from here if you're truly in need." Clara repeated her request, her voice gaining an unexpected quiet firmness. "I only wish to play, just one piece, in exchange for a plate of food." A ripple of amusement spread through the assembled guests. "She imagines she can play the piano," scoffed a man in a tailored charcoal suit, adjusting his cufflinks. "She probably couldn't tell a C major from a simple nursery rhyme." Another woman, shaking her head with an exaggerated sigh of feigned pity, added, "It's truly sweet, the boundless imagination of these young ones. They see a film, and suddenly they believe themselves capable of anything." Yet Clara did not avert her gaze. There was something in her posture, a quiet, unwavering dignity, a silent self-assurance that seemed profoundly out of place for a child in her obvious circumstances. It was as if she possessed a secret knowledge, something entirely unknown to the glittering crowd around her. From the rear of the ballroom, Professor David Lee, a renowned concert pianist and an esteemed judge of national music competitions, observed the unfolding scene. He had initially noticed the girl's eyes, fixed upon the Steinway with a reverence he seldom witnessed, even among his most advanced conservatory students. It was more than admiration, there was a flicker of recognition, a profound familiarity in her gaze. He moved forward, interrupting Eleanor's dismissive tirade. "Eleanor," he suggested, his voice calm and authoritative, "perhaps we should allow her to play. After all, is our purpose not to foster the talents of promising young individuals?" Eleanor let out a brittle, dismissive laugh. "David, please, just look at her. Children from her background simply do not have access to the kind of rigorous music education required to perform on an instrument like this. It's an utter impossibility. What none of them, including Eleanor, could possibly know was that Clara had spent the first 8 years of her life in a home where music was as integral as the very air they breathed. Her grandmother, Eleanor Ellie Evans, a classical pianist of immense natural talent who had been denied the recognition she so richly deserved due to the pervasive racial prejudices of her era, had been Clara's first and only teacher. When Ellie passed away suddenly, and Clara found herself abruptly thrust into the bewildering and often lonely foster care system, she carried with her not only the profound ache of loss, but also a raw, unrefined talent that even she had yet to fully comprehend. Despite the palpable disdain emanating from the elite gathering, Clara stood her ground, unyielding. She had weathered storms far more brutal than this, learning to forge strength from her own deep vulnerability. Her fingers, almost unconsciously, began to trace an invisible melody in the air, a small private habit she had cultivated over years to soothe herself during moments of intense difficulty or anxiety. This silent, subtle movement was a testament to the music that resided not just in her memory but in the very fiber of her being. Eleanor Vance, determined to reassert her control over the narrative, and more importantly, over Clara, dramatically crossed her arms. A theatrical laugh escaped her lips, as if she had just heard the most exquisitely absurd joke imaginable. "Very well, dear," she declared, her voice still dripping with a syrupy condescension. "Since you are so incredibly insistent, let us by all means make a small arrangement. You may play, but under certain precise conditions." The crowd, sensing the delicious tang of a cruel spectacle about to unfold, instinctively drew closer. Eleanor reveled in being the absolute center of attention, especially when she could publicly showcase her supposed moral superiority before her peers in high society. "First condition," Eleanor announced, raising a perfectly manicured finger, the movement sharp and decisive. "You will play only one single song, and we shall be the ones to select it for you. Second condition, should you by some miraculous stroke of sheer luck manage to play even decently, a term I use loosely of course, I will personally ensure you receive a full hot dinner." She paused for a dramatic beat, allowing her words to hang in the air, heavy with unspoken implication. "However," she continued, her voice hardening, "when you inevitably fail, and fail miserably, as we all know you will depart this establishment immediately and never again presume to disturb respectable individuals such as ourselves." A faint, sympathetic whisper emerged from an older woman at the back of the group. How terribly cruel, but her quiet protest was quickly swallowed by the approving murmurs and low, satisfied laughter of the other guests. Clara remained utterly still, her gaze unwavering on the piano. A tempest was brewing within her mind, memories from years past intertwining with the harsh reality of the present moment. She could almost hear her grandmother Ellie's soft, comforting voice, a familiar melody in her mind. "When people attempt to diminish you, my dear, allow the music to speak on your behalf. Music cannot lie, and it knows no prejudice." "I accept," Clara stated simply, her voice clear, steady, and unexpectedly firm. Professor Lee watched, utterly fascinated. There was an indefinable quality about the girl's posture, the way her eyes seemed to commune with the instrument, that intrigued him profoundly. In his 30 years of meticulously evaluating countless pianists, he had honed an almost infallible instinct for recognizing authentic talent. And something, an almost imperceptible vibration, about this child made his expert senses tingle. "Perfect." Eleanor clapped her hands together, a sharp, triumphant sound. "Now for the music." She cast her gaze around the room, a predator searching for the most challenging, and crucially, the most humiliating option available. Her eyes landed on Arthur Hayes, a somewhat mediocre pianist who often performed at local jazz bars, a man known more for his connections than his musical prowess. "Arthur, darling," she cooed, "what would be a truly suitable piece for our young artist?" Arthur, clearly relishing his moment in the spotlight, smiled conspiratorially. "How about Beethoven's Für Ulysses?" he suggested with a mischievous glint in his eyes. Everyone who has ever merely touched a piano in their life attempts to play that piece. If she possesses any genuine ability at all, she should certainly be capable of that, shouldn't she? The choice elicited another wave of chuckles from the assembled crowd. For Elise was indeed often considered a beginner's piece among casual listeners, a familiar tune. However, to execute it with true perfection, to imbue it with the necessary grace and technical precision, demanded a refined technique and years of dedicated practice. It was, as Arthur and Eleanor knew, the perfect snare. If Clara merely knew the basics, she would stumble and fail disastrously. If she knew nothing at all, she wouldn't even know where to begin. An excellent choice, Eleanor applauded, a wide, triumphant smile plastered across her face, a piece that any child who has ever received a single piano lesson would know. There can be no possible excuses for failure here. Clara offered a slight nod, then turned and began to walk toward the magnificent Steinway. Each step she took seemed imbued with a quiet, unwavering determination that for some at the edges of the hall generated an inexplicably uncomfortable sensation. There was something profoundly unsettling about the scene. A 12-year-old child should not carry such an intense, unburdened dignity in the face of such calculated humiliation. As she reached the piano bench, Clara paused, then adjusted its height with precise, familiar movements, settling herself perfectly. Professor Lee felt an involuntary shiver trace its way down his spine. Those, he thought, were not the movements of a novice. "Look at that," Eleanor sneered, leaning in to whisper conspiratorially to the guests closest to her, a gesture designed for maximum public effect. "She doesn't even seem to know how to properly position herself on the bench. She has most likely never laid eyes on a real grand piano in her entire life." But Professor Lee had observed the exact opposite. The subtle, assured adjustment of the bench, the upright yet relaxed posture, the way Clara's hands hovered over the keys in a perfect classically trained position, these were intricate details that took years, often decades, to fully master. Memories, vivid and overwhelming, flooded Clara's mind like a powerful incoming tide. Her grandmother Ellie Evans had been a trailblazer, one of the very first black pianists to attempt to gain admission to the city's prestigious conservatory back in the 1960s. Her raw, undeniable talent had been beyond question, yet the doors had remained stubbornly closed, bolted shut by the unyielding prejudice of the era. Undeterred, Ellie had channeled her immense passion into teaching, transforming her humble home and an old, slightly out-of-tune upright piano into a vibrant portal to the captivating world of classical music for children throughout her community. "Music is our universal tongue, Clara," Ellie used to say, her gentle fingers guiding her granddaughter's small hands over the cool ivory keys. "When you play from the very core of your heart, people listen with their souls, not with their judgmental eyes." Clara had spent countless blissful hours at that piano, absorbing not only the intricate technical skills but also the profound intuitive musical understanding that only a truly great master can impart. When Ellie passed away, and Clara was abruptly torn from everything she had ever known, music remained her one constant, her most loyal companion. She played on imaginary pianos during the long, lonely nights in city shelters, the melodies a silent comfort in the crushing silence of her new reality. "We are waiting," Eleanor's impatient voice broke through Clara's reverie, her fingers drumming an insistent rhythm on the back of a nearby chair. "Or have you, perhaps, decided to concede defeat before even attempting?" Clara took a deep, centering breath, then with a deliberate grace, placed her hands on the keys. The initial contact was like a jolt of pure electricity coursing through her. After months, seemingly an eternity, without playing a real instrument, feeling the familiar texture of the keys beneath her fingertips was akin to rediscovering a long-lost part of her very soul. The first note, a single pure tone, echoed through the vast hall with a crystalline clarity that startled several guests, causing them to involuntarily lift their heads in surprise. It was not the hesitant, amateurish sound they had so confidently anticipated. This was a note played with the profound assurance of someone who intimately understood every subtle nuance of the instrument, as if it were an extension of her own being. Professor Lee, his professional curiosity now fully ignited, approached discreetly, his gaze intently fixed on Clara. That initial note, he observed, had been executed with an utterly impeccable technique, a precise attack, a perfectly sustained resonance, a controlled timbre. These were minute details he knew that only years of serious dedicated training could possibly produce. Coincidence, Eleanor murmured under her breath, a desperate attempt to regain her composure, but her voice had noticeably lost some of its earlier arrogant confidence. Clara began the main melody of Fur-Elise, and with each note that flowed effortlessly from her hands, it was as if a small miracle unfolded before them. There was no hesitation, no technical misstep, no uncertain stumble. The music emerged with an astonishing naturalness, as if she and the piano were not separate entities, but rather components of a single living organism. But there was something more, something that utterly stunned Professor Lee, an emotional maturity in her interpretation that was simply unheard of in one so young. The exquisite way she phrased the melodic passages, the masterful control over the subtle dynamics, the profound manner in which she allowed the very silence between the notes to speak with as much eloquence as the music itself. This was the work of a seasoned, mature artist, not an untrained child. The grand hall had fallen into an absolute breathless silence. Champagne glasses remained motionless, forgotten in the guests' hands. The elegant hum of conversation had completely ceased. Even the impeccably dressed waiters, usually models of discreet motion, had paused, frozen in their tracks. Every single person present was mesmerized by the small, unassuming figure at the piano, a figure who was, against all expectations, creating music of an unexpected and breathtaking beauty. A cold, unsettling sensation began to coil in the pit of Eleanor Vance's stomach, a feeling alien to her carefully controlled world. The script she had meticulously crafted for this evening, a tale of her own magnanimity juxtaposed against another's failure, was not merely deviating, it was unraveling entirely, each perfect thread of her design coming loose before her very eyes. This unexpected turn of events, a phenomenon unfolding with a grace she could neither comprehend nor contain, was rapidly morphing the carefully orchestrated public humiliation into something else entirely, something breathtakingly beautiful, and utterly terrifyingly beyond her reach. As Clara continued to play, lost deep within the music that flowed through her like an irresistible force of nature, a single unspoken question echoed silently in the minds of everyone present. Who was this girl, really, and what profound secrets was her music about to unveil? As Clara effortlessly navigated the most intricate and complex passages of Fur-Elise, Professor Lee felt his heart begin to quicken its pace. 40 years of meticulously evaluating musical talent had honed his instincts to an almost supernatural degree, and what he was witnessing defied every logical explanation he had ever encountered. The girl's technique was not merely competent, it was quite simply extraordinary. The notoriously challenging descending arpeggio passage, a section that often stumped even his most advanced conservatory students, flowed from her nimble fingers like a crystal-clear mountain spring. Each individual note carried an undeniable weight and a specific purpose. Each brief pause seemed to breathe with a mature, profound musicality. Professor Lee watched, utterly captivated, as she controlled the sustained pedal with the precision and artistry of a professional concert pianist. "This is impossible," he muttered softly to himself, moving even closer to the piano, his every fiber attuned to the unfolding musical revelation. Eleanor, sensing the drastic shift in the atmosphere, felt the first truly serious alarm bells begin to clamor urgently in her mind. The conversations, so lively just moments ago, had ceased entirely. Even her attentive waiters had completely stopped serving, mesmerized by the sheer power of the music that was transforming her meticulously designed ballroom into an impromptu, electrifying concert hall. "She must have simply memorized this song from some online video," Eleanor declared loudly, her voice ringing with a desperate forced cheerfulness, intended to be heard by those around her. She was trying frantically to regain control of the narrative, to dismiss what was unfolding. Kids these days, they copy absolutely everything from the internet. But her explanation, even to her own ears, sounded increasingly hollow and weak. What Clara was doing transcended mere imitation. It was pure, unadulterated interpretation, loaded with an emotional understanding that typically only came with years of serious, dedicated study, and even more importantly, profound life experience. Professor Lee had in his illustrious career witnessed countless child prodigies, from 5-year-olds effortlessly playing Mozart to teenagers mastering the most demanding Rachmaninoff concertos. but he had very rarely, if ever, seen such an astounding combination of impeccable technique and deep musical maturity in someone so incredibly young, especially under such profoundly unlikely circumstances. Clara reached the magnificent climax of the piece, the point where the main melody triumphantly returns with renewed force after a series of dazzling virtuosic passages. Her hands danced across the keys with an intimate familiarity that unmistakably revealed hundreds, perhaps even thousands of hours of dedicated solitary practice. It was simply impossible to fake that profound level of personal intimacy with an instrument, that seamless connection between player and piano. Memories flowed through the music, a deep silent river running beneath the surface of the performance. Clara could hear her grandmother Ellie's voice, clear as a bell, echoing through the years. Music isn't merely about striking the correct notes, my dear. It is about weaving a story, a narrative that only you with your unique voice can truly tell. Ellie Evans had been far more than just a teacher. She was a visionary, a woman who seemed to glimpse the future through her granddaughter's small, capable fingers. Born in 1940, Ellie had grown up in an era where black pianists were systematically and unequivocally excluded from the most prestigious conservatories and grand concert halls. Her powerful response to this injustice was to transform her own modest home into a vibrant musical temple, a sanctuary where children from the community discovered, perhaps for the first time, that classical music belonged to them too. The world will relentlessly try to convince you that certain things are simply not meant for people like us, Ellie used to say, her gentle hands adjusting Clara's posture on the piano bench, ensuring she was perfectly aligned. But music, my love, knows no color, no poverty, no artificial limits. It knows only truth, and it speaks only from the soul. For 8 blessed transformative years, Clara absorbed not only the intricate techniques of classical piano but also a profound musical philosophy. Ellie taught her that each great composer possessed a unique individual language. Chopin spoke of profound longing, Beethoven of epic struggle and ultimate triumph, Mozart of crystalline joy and playful elegance. More importantly, Clara learned that her own musical voice, her unique interpretation, was equally valuable, equally valid. When Ellie died suddenly from a heart attack, Clara didn't just lose her beloved grandmother, she lost her entire world. The abrupt transition into the impersonal foster care system brutally separated her from music, from the piano, from everything that had given meaning and structure to her young existence. For 4 long silent years, she carried the melodies only in her mind, playing on imaginary keyboards in the cold, often desolate dormitories of various shelters. But now in this utterly surreal moment at the Grand Imperial Ballroom, it all rushed back, surging through her with an exhilarating force. Every single lesson, every gentle correction, every single word of encouragement from Ellie flowed through her hands, as if no time had ever passed at all. Professor Lee watched in unadulterated awe as Clara played the final coda of the piece. The meticulous way she controlled the dynamics, beginning at a barely audible pianissimo and slowly masterfully building to a majestic forte, before gracefully returning to the delicate whisper of the beginning, this revealed a musical understanding that typically took decades to fully develop. "Please, tell me you are witnessing this too," he whispered urgently to his colleague beside him, a distinguished piano professor from the local university. "This child, she is not merely talented, she is a true phenomenon." Eleanor Vance felt the very ground beneath her feet begin to shift, threatening to give way. Her carefully orchestrated strategy, designed specifically to publicly humiliate a vulnerable child, was now spiraling into the exact opposite of her meticulous plan. Instead of affirming her deeply ingrained prejudices, Clara was, with every perfectly played note, compelling everyone present to question their most fundamental assumptions about social class, race, and inherent merit. "It simply must be some sort of trick," Eleanor murmured to her closest friends, her voice laced with a frantic desperation. "No one acquires piano skills like that out of thin air. She must have had incredibly expensive private lessons, hidden away somewhere." But even as she spoke the words, Eleanor knew with a chilling certainty that her own arguments sounded increasingly hollow, increasingly unconvincing.
The child seated before them was demonstrating a level of excellence, a profound depth of artistry, that mere money alone could never purchase. She was playing with a soulfulness, with a lived history, with a profound depth that emanated from places privilege could never hope to reach. Clara played the final, lingering chords of Für Elise, with a delicate touch that caused several people in the audience to involuntarily hold their breath. When the last ethereal echo finally faded into the absolute profound silence of the hall, she kept her hands suspended above the keys for a fleeting moment, as if reluctant to break the magical, almost sacred connection between herself and the instrument. Then slowly, gracefully, she turned on the bench to face the now utterly silent, captivated crowd. There was no trace left of the shy, uncertain child who had humbly begged for food. In her place sat a young artist, composed and powerful, who had just unequivocally claimed her rightful place in the world through the timeless, universal language of music. Professor Lee was the first to break the profound silence, his hands coming together in a slow, reverent applause that resonated through the grand hall like distant gathering thunder. Gradually, tentatively at first, others joined in, their individual claps building into a crescendo until the entire grand imperial ballroom vibrated with a chorus of genuine heartfelt acclaim. Eleanor looked around the room in growing, palpable panic. Her calculated attempt at public humiliation had spectacularly backfired, transforming instead into an overwhelming celebration of the very talent she had so brazenly tried to deny. Worse still, she could clearly see in the wide, questioning eyes of the other guests a terrifying thought taking root. If they were so profoundly wrong about this child, what else might they be wrong about? Clara remained seated calmly, allowing the wave of applause to wash over her like a gentle, much-needed rain after a long, parched drought. But behind her calm eyes, something new was beginning to stir, something powerful and undeniable. It was not arrogance, but rather a deepening, clear-eyed understanding of her own formidable power. She had unequivocally proven her point, but this, she knew, was only the very beginning. Professor Lee approached the piano with a quiet reverence, his expression a complex mixture of profound admiration and intense professional curiosity. "Child," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "may I be so bold as to ask where you received your training? Your teacher, they must be truly extraordinary." Clara looked him directly in the eye, and for a fleeting moment, she allowed all the accumulated pain and solitude of the last 4 years to show clearly in their depths. "My grandmother taught me," she replied simply, her voice carrying a quiet weight. "She always said that music was the one thing that no one, absolutely no one, could ever take away from me." The answer struck Professor Lee like a bolt of lightning. A grandmother, not an expensive elite conservatory. Family love, not purchased privilege. Talent cultivated painstakingly at home, not in the sterile, competitive environment of an elite institution. Everything he had ever profoundly believed about how musical excellence was meticulously created, how it was nurtured and brought to fruition, was being utterly challenged, redefined, by a 12-year-old girl who had just shattered every single one of his expectations of greatness. While the grand hall still echoed with a lingering, reluctant admiration, Clara knew, with absolute certainty, that she had crossed an invisible line. She could no longer, even if she wished to, pretend to be merely a lost child begging for food. Her music had revealed far too much, promised far too much. Now, with all eyes in the room fixed intently upon her, and a heavy expectation hanging in the air like a thick, intoxicating perfume, she had to decide just how far she was truly willing to take that revelation. Was she ready to show these privileged people what a seemingly worthless child could truly accomplish when the music spoke through her soul, imbued with the potent force of generations of denied dreams?
Professor Lee approached the piano with careful, almost reverent steps, as if drawing near something sacred, something profoundly important. "Young lady," he said, his voice trembling ever so slightly, laden with a sudden profound realization. "I need to ask you a very important question. What, if you please, is your full name?" "Clara Evans," she replied, maintaining the same calm, self-possessed demeanor she had exhibited throughout the entire evening. The name struck Professor Lee like a second, even more powerful bolt of lightning. His eyes widened significantly, and he took an involuntary step backward, as if physically recoiling from the force of the recognition. "Evans? Eleanor Evans? Are you by any chance Eleanor Evans's granddaughter?" Clara nodded silently, her gaze steady. Professor Lee, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the revelation, covered his face with his trembling hands. "My God," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion tinged with a deep ancient pain. Eleanor Evans was, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most incredibly gifted pianists this country has ever produced. She should have graced the stages of the best conservatories and concert halls in the entire world. His voice faltered, heavy with the weight of that long-ago injustice, a testament to talent cruelly denied. Eleanor Vance watched the exchange with growing palpable unease, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Robert," she interjected, her voice sharp with impatience, "what on earth are you talking about? Who, pray tell, is Eleanor Evans?" Professor Lee turned to her, his expression a searing mixture of disbelief and utter disgust. "Eleanor," he said, his voice cold and cutting. Eleanor Evans was a legend within the music community, a virtuoso whose extraordinary talent was systematically and tragically excluded from conservatories and concert halls solely because of the color of her skin. In response, she became one of the most respected private music teachers in this entire country, tirelessly training dozens of professional musicians who went on to achieve great success. A ripple of murmuring spread through the crowd as some guests, upon hearing the name, began to recognize it from their own musical experiences or from whispered anecdotes. Eleanor Evans, they whispered to each other, was renowned in musical circles as a teacher who possessed the almost magical ability to transform any dedicated student into an exceptional, brilliant artist. "But that," Eleanor retorted, her voice sounding increasingly defensive, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack, "that was decades ago. And even if that rather fanciful story is true, it certainly doesn't alter the undeniable fact that she is a homeless person, attempting to beg for money at a private exclusive event." It was at that precise moment that Clara rose slowly from the piano bench. For the first time that entire evening, she allowed her true powerful personality to emerge completely, shedding the submissive posture like an old worn cloak. The timid, quiet demeanor vanished, replaced by an unshakable dignity, a quiet force that caused several people in the room to unconsciously recoil, a visceral reaction to her sudden powerful presence. "Mrs. Vance," Clara said, her voice now clear and resonating with an undeniable firmness, addressing the event organizer directly. "You are absolutely correct about one thing, and one thing only: I should not be here tonight." She paused, allowing the sudden profound silence to settle heavily over the room, an almost tangible presence. "Indeed, I should be at the Majestic Symphony Hall in New York, where I have a recital scheduled for next week." A deathly stunned silence descended upon the entire room, thick and suffocating. Eleanor felt the floor beneath her feet not just shift but completely give way. "My name is Clara Evans," she continued, her voice unwavering, "and I am the youngest classical pianist ever to be accepted into the prestigious Willow Creek Conservatory's Young Artists program. I am also the current national champion of classical piano for under 15s. She paused again, allowing the weight of this information to fully sink into the stunned consciousness of the privileged audience. "The actual reason I am here tonight is not, as you so readily assumed, because I am in desperate need of food or money." Professor Lee watched, utterly fascinated, as the intricate pieces of a complex puzzle suddenly began to fall perfectly into place in his mind. "The documentary," he murmured, a sudden sharp intake of breath. "You are the subject of the documentary." Clara nodded, a subtle knowing gesture. "Exactly. I am collaborating with PBS on a documentary series focusing on systemic prejudice and equitable access to the arts. My producer specifically suggested that I attend various charity events, ostensibly for arts education, disguised as a young person without resources. The purpose to meticulously document how privileged individuals truly perceive and treat those they consider inferior." The revelation landed on the room like a devastating bomb. Eleanor felt all the blood drain from her face, leaving her pale and ghostly. You're filming us." "Hidden cameras," Clara confirmed calmly, her gaze unflinching. "High-definition audio and video. Everything that has transpired here tonight has been meticulously documented for national broadcast." Eleanor looked around frantically, desperately searching for cameras, for any sign, however small, that this was all a cruel, elaborate prank. "That's illegal," she shrieked, her voice cracking with a raw, rising panic. "You cannot possibly film us without our explicit consent." Actually, Mrs. Vance, Professor Lee interjected, his voice laden with a dark, profound satisfaction, a quiet triumph. You all signed image releases when you entered the event this evening. It is stated quite clearly on the ticket that this event could be filmed for documentary purposes. He smiled faintly, a sardonic curve of his lips. I'm quite certain that no one bothered to read the fine print, did they? The crowd began to stir restlessly, a low murmur growing into a frantic whispering as people anxiously turned to each other. Some were already fumbling for their phones, desperately attempting to locate and check their tickets. The panic in the room was now palpable, thick and suffocating. The first segment of the documentary, Clara continued, completely ignoring the escalating chaos, her voice clear and strong, will focus on precisely how raw talent and profound potential are systematically overlooked and dismissed when they are presented in appearances that defy privileged expectations. The second part will expose how individuals who loudly claim to be ardent defenders of the arts actually react when confronted with genuine powerful art originating from unexpected, unapproved sources. I have simply documented your true personalities tonight, your unfiltered reactions, because you genuinely believed there would be absolutely no consequences for your actions or your words. Professor Lee approached Clara with an expression of profound respect, a genuine admiration radiating from him. May I ask, young lady, what you intend to do with this extraordinary recording? The documentary series will air nationally next month, Clara explained, her composure unwavering. However, I have also created a YouTube channel where I regularly post shorter, more concise versions of these social experiments. My latest video, filmed at a similar event in Boston, currently boasts over 2.5 million views. It seems people are particularly drawn to seeing hypocrisy exposed, especially when it comes from individuals who pretend to be virtuous while actively practicing the very prejudices they publicly claim to fight against. The crowd watched in horrified, stunned silence as Eleanor Vance was forced to confront the chilling reality of her situation. In a mere matter of days, her public cruelty, her dismissive arrogance, would be seen by millions of people across the nation. Her name, a name she had meticulously cultivated and protected, would forever be inextricably linked with the precise kind of prejudice and elitism she had so undeniably demonstrated tonight. Mrs. Vance, Clara said, addressing the event organizer directly, her gaze unwavering, her voice gaining an astonishing strength that utterly silenced the entire hall. You have spent this entire evening telling me, directly and indirectly, that people like me do not deserve to be in places like this. You have implied that we possess no inherent value, no genuine talent, and certainly no right to participate in what you deem high cultures. Clara's voice resonated with a powerful conviction that left no room for doubt. Tomorrow, Mrs. Vance, the entire world will see exactly the kind of person you truly are. Eleanor tried desperately to speak, but the words refused to form, trapped in her constricted throat. The sheer magnitude of her impending public humiliation, a humiliation broadcast nationally, was simply too enormous, too devastating for her to fully process. Professor Lee looked around the room, seeing the stark panic etched onto the faces of the other guests. How many other events, he asked Clara, his voice now a quiet, grave murmur, have you or your team filmed? This is the 12th, Clara replied, her tone factual, devoid of triumph, and it is always invariably the same. People who loudly claim to value art and education, but who immediately judge and summarily dismiss talent based solely on superficial appearances. She turned to face Eleanor Vance one last time, her expression unreadable. The difference between you and me, Mrs. Vance, is that when I was actually homeless for a few months after my grandmother's death, I learned a fundamental truth, that true dignity does not emanate from money, or from inherited status. It comes unequivocally from how we choose to treat other human beings when we truly believe no one is watching. The silence that followed Clara's words was deafening, a heavy, oppressive blanket. Every single person present in the room knew, with a sickening certainty, that their words and actions that night would be scrutinized and judged by millions of strangers. And most knew, deep in their hearts, that there was no possible defense for the raw prejudice and elitism they had so brazenly demonstrated. As Clara discreetly collected a small, almost imperceptible recording device hidden within her worn backpack, one chilling question hung heavy in the air of the grand imperial ballroom.
How many other privileged and prejudiced individuals had discovered too late that the young woman they had so casually despised possessed the undeniable power to reveal their true unvarnished nature to the entire world. 6 months later, Eleanor Vance watched from the grimy window of her cramped one-bedroom apartment as a sleek black limousine purred to a halt in front of the majestic entrance of the majestic Symphony Hall. Clara Evans, now resplendent in an elegant flowing concert gown, waved gracefully to an adoring throng of fans and photographers before entering the Grand Theater. Inside, she was poised to make her highly anticipated debut as the youngest soloist of the season. The documentary, aptly titled Faces of Discrimination, had become a cultural phenomenon, going explosively viral and racking up an astonishing 15 million views on YouTube alone. Eleanor Vance had, tragically and irrevocably, become the national symbol of elitist hypocrisy, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. She had lost not only her coveted position in every charitable organization in Willow Creek, but also the hard-won respect of a high society she had valued above all else. Headlines screamed from local newspapers for weeks. Former charity event organizer exposed as prejudiced in viral documentary. Her luxury event planning company, once the epitome of exclusivity, lost all its important clients, their names etched into a list of those who would never again hire her services. Eleanor now worked as a low-level administrative assistant at a small struggling law firm, desperately attempting to rebuild a shattered reputation that she knew in her heart might never fully recover. Meanwhile, Professor David Lee had enthusiastically embraced his role as Clara's official mentor, guiding her with immense pride and expertise through the intricate, often overwhelming world of professional classical music. The Grand Imperial Ballroom, deeply embarrassed by the relentless public exposure and the tarnishing of its reputation, had swiftly moved to create a comprehensive scholarship program for underprivileged young musicians, proudly naming Clara Evans as its official ambassador. Music knows no color, no social class, no arbitrary zip codes, Clara had articulated with serene confidence in her first national television interview after the incident, her voice calm and resonant. It knows only truth, and it knows only passion. And when you possess both of those, truly, no barrier can ever hope to stop you. The profound impact of the documentary transcended mere entertainment. Music schools across the country, inspired and chastened, initiated new community outreach programs. Prestigious conservatories critically re-evaluated and revised their admissions processes, striving for greater equity. Hundreds of talented young people from disadvantaged communities, individuals who had previously been systematically denied even the slimmest chance, were now given opportunities that had for far too long been unjustly withheld from them. Eleanor Vance, watching Clara's triumphant rise from the window of her small apartment, a window that now framed a very different, far less glamorous view of the city, finally, painfully, understood the most difficult lesson of her entire life. Dignity and genuine talent, she realized, could not be bought with money. They could not be inherited with a famous surname, or conferred by social status. And most profoundly, they could absolutely not be measured by the color of one's skin, or the address where one happened to reside. Clara's ultimate, most satisfying revenge was not to destroy Eleanor, but rather to incontrovertibly prove that true greatness transcends all forms of prejudice, and that sometimes, those whom we least expect, those we most readily dismiss, are the very ones who carry the most extraordinary, world-changing gifts.